kicked out at 18 for getting his 16-year-old girlfriend pregnant. 12 years later, his son brings a shocking secret that changes everything. The sun dipped low over the rolling hills of Cedar Hollow, a small forgotten town in rural Tennessee, casting a hazy orange glow across the cracked pavement and weathered wooden houses. Inside a modest home with a sagging front porch, Matt Carter sat on the edge of his bed, his hands clammy and his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. On the worn-out mattress beside him lay a small plastic stick, a pregnancy test with 2 pink lines staring back at him like a death sentence. In the bathroom down the hall, Sophie Miller, his 16-year-old girlfriend, was hunched over the toilet, retching for the 3rd time that afternoon. The sound of her gagging and the muffled sobs that followed seeped through the thin walls, each one tightening the knot in Matt's stomach. "What are we gonna do, Matt?" Sophie's voice came from the hallway, shaky and raw. She leaned against the door frame, her long blonde hair sticking to her tear-streaked face, her blue eyes red and swollen. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, her other hand resting on her barely noticeable baby bump. "I don't know," Matt said, running his hands through his short, dark hair. At 18, he felt like a kid playing at being a man, and right now he was drowning. "I don't know, Sophie. This wasn't supposed to happen." "Supposed to happen?" Sophie let out a bitter laugh that broke into a sob. "What was supposed to happen, Matt? Us going to the county fair next weekend, sneaking beers behind the barn? This is real, damn it, I'm pregnant." Matt shot to his feet, the sudden movement making the old floorboards creak. "Don't yell at me, okay? You think I don't get it? You think I'm not freaking out?" He took a step toward her, but stopped when she flinched, her arms wrapping protectively around her stomach. That small gesture hit him like a punch to the gut. He lowered his voice, almost whispering, "I don't know what to do either, all right? But don't yell at me." Sophie slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her knees pulled up as much as her belly would allow. "My parents are gonna kill me," she murmured, staring at the ceiling where a water stain spread, like a dark cloud. "My mom's always saying if I mess up, I'm out, and my dad's gonna lose it." Matt crouched in front of her, taking her cold hands in his. "They're not gonna touch you," he said, though he wasn't sure he could keep that promise. "We'll talk to them. We'll explain. I don't know. We'll tell them. We'll figure it out." "Figure it out how?" Sophie looked at him, her eyes narrowing like she was trying to decide if he was clueless or just naive. "With what money, Matt? You're working odd jobs at the gas station, and I haven't even finished high school. What do we do? Ask the baby to wait a few years till we get our crap together?" "I don't know, Sophie." Matt stood up again, pacing the small room like a caged animal. Anger and fear twisted inside him, sharp and jagged. "We'll do something. I'm not gonna let anything happen to you. You hear me? Not to you, not to it." He gestured awkwardly at her stomach, unsure how to even name the life growing there. Sophie went quiet, her gaze dropping to the floor. After a long moment, she said softly, "We need to tell your parents first. Mine are a mess, but yours, maybe they'll help us." Matt swallowed hard. The thought of facing his parents made his stomach churn worse than Sophie's morning sickness. His mom, Linda, was a hard woman, the kind who didn't forgive mistakes. His dad, Robert, was quieter, but when he got mad, he could break a chair with one swing. "Yeah," Matt said, though he didn't sound convinced. "We'll talk to them tonight." The Carter house smelled of burnt coffee and mothballs. It was a tired, single-story home with peeling white paint and a living room stuck in the 80s. Faded plaid couches, a boxy TV with rabbit ears, and a cross hanging above the door. Linda was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of mac and cheese on the stove, her movements sharp and mechanical. Robert sat at the table reading the local paper, his reading glasses perched on the tip of his nose. "Mom," Matt started, standing in the doorway to the kitchen. Sophie hovered behind him, gripping his hand so tight it hurt. "We need to talk to you and Dad." Linda glanced up, her brow furrowing. "What now? You get in a fight at the gas station again?" She set the wooden spoon down and wiped her hands on her apron, the fabric stained with years of cooking. "No, it's not that." Matt took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "It's something bigger." Robert lowered the paper, peering over his glasses. "What did you do, Matt?" His voice was low, like the rumble of a distant storm. Matt felt his knees go weak, but there was no turning back now. "Sophie's pregnant," he blurted out, the words tumbling from his mouth like stones. "And I'm the dad." The silence that followed was suffocating. Linda froze, her hands still tangled in her apron. Robert set the paper down with a slow, deliberate motion, his face unreadable. "What did you just say?" he asked, as if he hadn't heard right. "Sophie's pregnant," Matt repeated, quieter this time. "And I'm the dad." Linda let out a sharp gasp, her hand flying to her chest. "Jesus Christ, Matt! Are you out of your damn mind? What the hell were you thinking?" She took a step toward him, her hand raised like she might slap him, but she stopped short and turned on Sophie. "And you, little girl, you didn't have the sense to keep your legs closed? Or did you think you just ruined my son's life for fun?" Sophie shrank behind Matt, her face pale as a ghost. "It wasn't on purpose, ma'am," she whispered. We didn't mean to." "Didn't mean to?" Linda barked a laugh, cold and cutting. "Oh, sure, babies just happen by magic, don't they? You're a fool, and you, Matt, you're an even bigger idiot." Robert stood up, the chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Enough, Linda," he said, though his tone wasn't soft. He fixed Matt with a hard stare. "How long you known about this?" "Since today," Matt said. "We just found out. That's why we're telling you." "And what's your plan?" Robert asked, crossing his arms. "I'm guessing you didn't come in here to tell me this like it's some kind of birthday surprise." Matt glanced at Sophie, hoping for some kind of support, but she was trembling, her eyes glued to the floor. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought maybe you could help us. Let us stay here till we figure things out. I'll get a better job, Dad. I swear I'll take care of it." Linda let out another laugh, this one longer, sharper. "Stay here? With a knocked-up teenager? Are you high, Matt? This ain't a halfway house for your screw-ups." She stepped closer, jabbing a finger at him, her voice shaking with rage. "I raised you to be somebody, not to drag this kind of mess into my home." "Mom, please!" Matt's voice cracked, desperate. "I got nowhere else to go. Sophie doesn't either. What do you want me to do? Leave her on the street?" "Then you both can figure it out," Linda shouted. "You made this mess, you clean it up. I'm not raising some bastard kid because you couldn't keep it in your pants." Robert stepped between them, his presence heavy. "Calm down," he told Linda, though his voice was still hard. Then he turned to Matt. "What about her parents? What do they say?" Sophie spoke for the first time, her voice barely a whisper. "They don't know yet, but they won't want me at home. My mom always says if I mess up, I'm out." "Perfect," Linda said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "So you're both geniuses, and what are we supposed to do? Play happy? Grandparents and change diapers for you?" "I'm not asking for charity," Matt snapped, his desperation boiling over. "I'm asking for help, Mom. I'm your son, damn it. Don't you care what happens to me?" Linda's eyes flashed with something, anger, yes, but also a flicker of pain. "I care," she said, quieter now. "That's why it kills me to see you be this stupid. But I'm not carrying your mistakes, Matt. I'm not letting you drag this family down with you." The argument stretched into the night, voices rising and falling like a storm battering the house. Sophie sat in the corner of the living room, curled up on the couch, her knees pulled to her chest as she sobbed quietly. Matt and his parents kept at it in the kitchen, their shouts echoing through the thin walls. The neighbors could probably hear every word. Cedar Hollow wasn't the kind of place where secrets stayed secret, but Matt didn't care anymore. He just wanted them to understand, to help, even if just for a little while. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," Linda was saying, pacing the kitchen. "After everything I've done for you, you know how hard it was to raise you? The nights I stayed up while your dad worked doubles at the mill? And this is how you repay me?" "I'm not repaying you with anything, Mom," Matt shot back. "I didn't do this to hurt you. It was an accident." "An accident," Robert said, his voice flat. "Accidents are when you dent the truck, Matt. This is a damn disaster." "Then tell me what to do," Matt yelled, his hands balled into fists. "Tell me. You want me to make it disappear? I can't. It's done." Robert didn't answer right away. He just stared at Matt, his face a mask of disappointment. Then he said, calm but firm, "You need to leave." Matt blinked, his breath catching in his throat. "What?" "You heard me," Robert said. "You can't stay here. Not with her. Not with this." "You're kicking me out?" Matt's voice broke, and for a moment he looked like he might cry. "Dad, please. I got nowhere to go." "I told you 100 times to be careful," Robert said, his tone unwavering. "I told you not to get into trouble. You didn't listen. Now you deal with the consequences." Linda crossed her arms, nodding. "Your dad's right. We're not supporting you, Matt. Not you, not your girlfriend. You want to play grown-up? Do it somewhere else." Matt looked between them, his chest heaving. "You're my parents," he said, more to himself than to them. "My family, and you're throwing me out like I'm nothing." "You're not nothing," Linda said, her voice trembling for the first time. "You're my son. But I can't do this. I can't let you ruin us." The door slammed shut with a bang that echoed down the quiet street. Matt stood on the gravel driveway, a beat-up backpack slung over his shoulder and a crumpled $20 bill. In his fist, his dad had thrown it at him before slamming the door. Sophie stood beside him, her arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming down her face. The night had settled over Cedar Hollow, the air thick with the smell of damp grass and exhaust. Crickets chirped in the distance, but the sound felt far away, drowned out by the ringing in Matt's ears. "What do we do now?" Sophie asked, her voice hoarse from crying. Matt didn't answer right away. He looked back at the house one last time, the porch light flickering, his mom's shadow in the window, and then turned to the dark street ahead. "I don't know," he said finally, "but we're not staying here." They walked in silence, to the edge of town, to a run-down park with a broken swing set and a splintered bench. They sat under the faint glow of a street lamp, Sophie shivering against him as he wrapped an arm around her. The $20 wouldn't get them far, not even a night, at the motel on Route 12, and the gas station wouldn't pay him until the end of the month. "We'll get through this," Matt said, more to himself than to her. "I'll find a job. I'll make sure our kid doesn't grow up like this." Sophie didn't reply. She just pressed her face into his chest and closed her eyes, as if she could shut out the world for a little while. Matt stared up at the sky, where the stars were barely visible through the clouds, and felt the weight of everything, the pregnancy, the fight, the future, crushing him like a boulder. By morning, when Sophie threw up behind a tree and Matt had to swipe a bag of chips from the gas station to feed her, he knew his promises were as fragile as the paper they weren't even written on. But there was no other choice. They were on their own, and the road ahead was a dark, endless stretch they'd have to walk together, one broken step at a time. The Greyhound bus rattled along the 2-lane highway, kicking up dust and gravel as it cut through the flat, endless fields of rural Tennessee. Matt Carter sat by the window, his forehead pressed against the smudged glass, staring blankly at the blur of cornfields and faded billboards passing by. At 30, He looked older than his years. His face was weathered, with a short, scruffy beard, and a scar slicing through his left eyebrow from a bar fight 2 years back. Dark circles hung under his eyes, a testament to the sleepless nights and the weight of the last few months. Next to him, 12-year-old Tyler sat slouched in his seat, his thumbs tapping lazily on the cracked screen of an old smartphone, playing some game that barely held his interest. The kid hadn't said much since they'd boarded the bus in Nashville, nearly 4 hours ago. Just a quiet "I'm hungry" when they'd stopped at a gas station where Matt had scraped together enough change to buy him a bag of chips and a soda. "How much longer?" Tyler asked, his voice flat, not even looking up from his phone. He had dark hair like Sophie's, but his eyes were different, deeper, harder, like they'd seen too much for a kid his age. "About an hour," Matt replied, rubbing his eyes with his knuckles. He was exhausted, not just from the trip, but from everything. The last few months, the last few years, really. His voice was rough, like he'd smoked a pack a day, though he'd never touched a cigarette. Tyler grunted, a sound that might have been an "okay," and went back to his game. Matt glanced at him, trying to read the boy's expression, but Tyler's face was a blank slate. Matt had always thought Tyler didn't look much like him, but he'd never let himself dwell on it. Kids didn't always take after their dads, right? Now with Sophie gone and Tyler in his care, those doubts buzzed in his head like a swarm of gnats he couldn't swat away. "What are you going to do when we get there?" Matt asked, more to break the silence than because he really wanted to know. Tyler shrugged, his eyes still on the screen. "Dunno. Sleep, I guess. Does your parents' place have a TV?" "Yeah, it does," Matt said, though he wasn't sure. It had been 12 years since he'd set foot in Cedar Hollow, since his parents had kicked him out like he was a stray dog. The old TV in the living room might be busted or replaced or who knew what. "If it doesn't work, I'll find something to keep you busy." "I don't get bored easy," Tyler said, and for the first time, he looked up from his phone. Their eyes met for a brief second, and there was something in Tyler's gaze, a mix of defiance and exhaustion, that made Matt look away, uneasy. The bus hit a pothole, jolting them both, and Matt gripped the seat to steady himself. In the duffel bag on his lap, he carried a couple of changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and a crumpled photo of Sophie he'd found among Tyler's things. He'd taken it without telling the kid. It was from back when Sophie still smiled, before the cancer ate her away, before the years of fights and poverty drained her dry. Matt wasn't sure why he kept it. Maybe because it was all he had left of her, besides the boy sitting next to him. It had been 3 months since Sophie died. Matt was unloading crates at a warehouse on the outskirts of Nashville when he got the call. It was a neighbor, an older woman with a gravelly voice, who didn't waste time with pleasantries. "She passed last night. Cancer took her quick. Tyler's with me. Come get him when you can." Matt dropped a crate of canned goods, the sound of metal hitting concrete snapping him out of his daze. That same afternoon, he took a bus to the run-down apartment where Sophie had spent her last years. When he got there, Tyler was sitting on the stoop outside, a backpack at his feet and his phone in his hands. He wasn't crying, wasn't saying much. He just looked up at Matt and asked, "You here to get me? Or are they sending me to a foster home?" Matt didn't know what to say. He hadn't seen the kid in almost a year, and the visits before that had been short, awkward, full of silences and unspoken resentment. But he couldn't leave him there. "I'm here to get you," he said finally, and Tyler stood up without another word. The days that followed were a blur of paperwork and debt. Sophie hadn't left anything, no money, no will, not even a letter, just a pile of unpaid bills and a cheap pine box they buried her in at the county cemetery. Matt paid what he could with the little cash he'd saved and took Tyler back to the cramped room he rented near the warehouse. But they couldn't stay there. The room was a damp hole with a single bed and a hot plate, and Matt knew he couldn't raise a kid in a place like that. The only option was to go back to Cedar Hollow, face his parents and beg or demand a place to start over. "Do your folks know we're coming?" Tyler asked, pulling Matt out of his thoughts. The bus had just passed a faded sign that read, "Welcome to Cedar Hollow, 15 miles. "No," Matt admitted, scratching the back of his neck. "I haven't talked to them since a long time ago, but they've got no reason to turn me away. And if they do—" Tyler pressed, his tone sharp like he was testing Matt's confidence. Matt clenched his jaw. "They won't. I'm their son. And you're, their grandson. They're not gonna leave us on the street." Tyler stared at him for a moment, like he was weighing whether to believe that or not, then went back to his phone. "Hope so," he muttered, so low Matt wasn't sure he'd heard it right. Cedar Hollow's bus stop was little more than a bench under a rusted metal awning, with a schedule taped to a pole that hadn't been updated in years. When the bus pulled in, Matt stepped off first, the duffel bag slung over his shoulder, and waited for Tyler to follow. The air hit him like a memory. It smelled of dry grass, pine, and something faintly sour, like the creek that ran through town had gone stagnant. It was just past noon, and the sun beat down hard, making the cracked pavement shimmer with heat. "Which way?" Tyler asked, stepping up beside him with his hands in his pockets. "This way," Matt said, nodding toward a narrow street lined with sagging houses and overgrown lawns. "It's a few blocks. We'll walk." Tyler didn't complain, though the heat had already plastered his hair to his forehead. They walked, in silence, their footsteps crunching on the gravel, the occasional bark of a dog breaking the stillness. Matt's stomach churned, and it wasn't just from hunger. He hadn't eaten since the chips on the road. It was the thought of what was coming. He hadn't spoken to his parents since that night 12 years ago, when they'd thrown him out with a $20 bill and a "don't come back." He'd tried calling a few times in the early years, but they always hung up as soon as they heard his voice. Now he was showing up unannounced, with a kid in tow, and the idea of facing them made him sweat more than the Tennessee sun. "What if they're not there?" Tyler said, kicking a pebble that skittered across the road. "They're there," Matt replied, though he had no way of knowing. "My dad doesn't go out much since he retired from the mill. And my mom's always home doing something, always has been." "What if they moved?" Tyler asked, his tone edging on mockery. Matt shot him a look. "They didn't move. This is their house since before I was born. They don't have the money to go anywhere else." Tyler shrugged like it didn't matter either way. "Just saying. It's been a long time." "Yeah, well," Matt said, his voice tight. "We'll see soon enough." They reached the corner of the street where the Carter house stood. Matt stopped for a moment, taking a deep breath. The place hadn't changed much. The same wooden houses with peeling paint, the same sagging power lines, the same heavy silence of midday. But his parents' house looked older, more worn. The white paint was chipped, the front porch sagged, even more than he remembered, and the lawn, which his mom used to keep neat as a pin, was now a tangle of weeds and crabgrass. The mailbox was rusted, and the doorbell hung from a frayed wire. "This it?" Tyler asked, eyeing the house with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Yeah," Matt said, stepping forward. He pressed the doorbell with shaky fingers, the shrill buzz cutting through the quiet street. He waited, counting the seconds in his head. 1, 2, 3. Nothing. He pressed it again, harder this time. "What if they're not there?" Tyler repeated, his voice now openly teasing. "Shut up for a second," Matt snapped, sharper than he meant to. He was about to press the bell a third time when he heard footsteps inside. The door creaked open, and there was Linda, her gray hair pulled back in a messy bun, her apron smudged with flour. She stared at him through the screen door, blinking like she wasn't sure what she was seeing. "Matt?" she said, her voice rough with disbelief. "Hey, Mom," Matt said, trying to sound steady despite the tremor in his legs. "I'm here. To stay. Linda's eyes narrowed, and her gaze slid to Tyler, who stood a step behind Matt, hands still in his pockets. And who's this? Matt took a deep breath. This is Tyler, my son. Sophie passed 3 months ago. We've got nowhere else to go. The silence that followed was thick, heavy enough to choke on. Linda's lips pressed into a hard line, her eyes boring into Matt's. Then she pushed the screen door open with a squeak and said, cold as ice, "You think I'm gonna roll out the red carpet for you after 12 years? I don't want a red carpet," Matt said, holding her gaze. "I want a roof, for me and for him." Linda crossed her arms, sizing him up like he was a stranger. "Come in," she said finally, turning back into the house. "But don't expect me to throw you a damn parade." Inside, the house smelled of damp wood and old furniture polish, like time had frozen the place in amber. The living room was the same as Matt remembered. The plaid couch with a tear in the armrest, the boxy TV with rabbit ears, the cross on the wall. But everything felt smaller, shabbier, like the years had worn it down along with his memories. Tyler stood near the door, taking it all in with that same guarded look he always had. "Sit if you want," Linda said to Tyler, not looking at him directly. Then she turned to Matt. "Where's your dad?" "In the back, working on the truck," she replied, her tone clipped. "He doesn't know you're here, and I don't know how he's gonna take it." "He'll find out soon enough," Matt said, setting the duffel bag on the floor. "Tyler, sit there. I'm gonna talk to my dad." Tyler obeyed without a word, dropping his backpack at his feet and sinking into the couch. Linda watched him for a moment, like she was trying to figure something out from his face, then turned and disappeared into the kitchen. Matt headed out to the backyard, where the sun beat down on a cluttered shed filled with tools and junk. Robert was there, crouched beside an old pickup truck, a wrench in his hand and his flannel shirt stained with grease. "Dad," Matt said, stopping a few feet away. Robert looked up slowly, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of his son. He stayed still for a moment, like he needed to process it, then asked, "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to stay," Matt said, straight to the point. "Sophie's gone. I've got Tyler with me. I don't have anywhere else to go." Robert set the wrench down and stood, wiping his hands on his shirt. 12 years, he said, his voice low and hard. 12 years without a call, without a letter, and now you show up with a kid and a sob story. "It's not a story," Matt shot back, his fists clenching. "It's the truth. I didn't come to beg for forgiveness. I came to ask for a place for me and the kid." Robert studied him for a long moment, his gaze cold and unyielding, the same look that had always made Matt feel small as a boy. "Talk to your mom," he said finally, turning back to the truck. "She decides." That night, Tyler slept on the couch, wrapped in an old quilt that smelled of mothballs. Matt stayed in the kitchen with his parents, sitting at the table, while Linda poured coffee and Robert lit a cigarette, the smoke curling toward the ceiling. The tension was thick, like a storm waiting to break. "I'm not asking you to take care of us," Matt said, breaking the silence. "I'll find work here, maybe at the gas station or the feed store. I just need some time to get on my feet." Linda set a mug of coffee in front of him, her movements stiff. "And the kid? What are you going to do with him?" "He'll go to school," Matt said. "He's smart. He'll manage." Robert took a drag on his cigarette, exhaling through his nose. "He doesn't seem too happy to be here," he said, his tone more observation than judgment. "He lost his mom 3 months ago," Matt replied, his voice tight. "He's not exactly jumping for joy." Linda set her mug down with a thud. "I don't like this, Matt," she said, looking at him for the first time. "I don't like you showing up after all this time with a kid we don't even know, expecting us to act like nothing happened." "I don't expect that," Matt said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "I know you hate me. I know you blame me for everything. But I didn't come for me, I came for him. Robert stubbed out his cigarette in an ashtray overflowing with butts. You can stay, he said, and Linda shot him a look that could have killed. But it's not going to be easy, and I'm not playing grandpa if I don't feel like it. Matt nodded, though his dad's words stung more than he expected. Fine, he said, that's enough for me. The Carter house in Cedar Hollow creaked under the weight of its own history, the kind of silence that felt alive with tension. It had been 5 days since Matt and Tyler arrived, and the air inside those walls was thick, like the humidity before a summer storm. The sun filtered weakly through the faded curtains in the living room, where Tyler spent his mornings sprawled on the couch, his old smartphone in hand and earbuds blasting music loud enough that Matt could hear the faint thump of bass from across the room. Matt, meanwhile, was out early every morning, walking the half-mile to the gas station on Route 12, where he'd been helping out for free in hopes of landing a steady job. He'd come back around noon, his flannel shirt soaked with sweat and his hands smelling of motor oil, but with nothing solid to show for it. Linda and Robert moved around the house like ghosts, her in the kitchen, him out back tinkering with the pickup truck, and neither seemed to know how to deal with the kid who'd suddenly become part of their lives. That morning, Matt pushed through the back door, his boots leaving faint streaks of dirt on the linoleum floor. He'd spent 3 hours at the gas station helping the owner, Hank, fix a busted carburetor, all for nothing but a "maybe we'll call you." The Tennessee heat had glued his t-shirt to his back, and sweat dripped from his brow as he set a half-empty water bottle on the counter. He found Tyler in his usual spot on the couch, legs dangling over the armrest, eyes glued to his phone. "You planning on staying there all day again?" Matt asked, his voice rough with exhaustion as he wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. Tyler pulled out one earbud and glanced at him, his expression blank. "What else am I supposed to do? There's nothing around here." "You could help out," Matt said, crossing his arms. "Mow the lawn, wash the dishes, something." "I'm not your maid," Tyler shot back, his tone sharp but calm, the kind of calm that always set Matt on edge. He slipped the earbud back in like the conversation was over. Matt's jaw tightened. "I'm not asking you to be my maid, Tyler. I'm asking you to do something around here. You live here now." "Yeah, 'cause you dragged me here," Tyler muttered, not looking up from his phone. "I'd rather be back in the city." The words hit Matt like a slap. He took a step toward the couch, his hands balling into fists. "What's that supposed to mean? You think I forced you to come? You had nowhere else to go, kid. Your mom's gone, and I was the only one who came to get you." Tyler looked up, and for the first time there was a flicker of something in his eyes, anger maybe, or hurt. "I didn't ask you to come," he said, his voice cold. "You could have left me with the neighbor, or in a foster home. I didn't need you hauling me to this nowhere town." Matt felt his chest burn, a mix of rage and guilt he couldn't untangle. "I didn't haul you anywhere," he shouted, his voice echoing in the small room. "I brought you here because you're my son, damn it. Because I wasn't gonna let you end up on the streets or in some place where nobody knows you." Tyler held his gaze for a moment, like he was deciding whether to push harder, then dropped his eyes back to his phone and put the other earbud in. The dismissal was like a wall slamming down between them. Matt took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, and stormed into the kitchen before he said something he'd regret. Linda was at the sink, peeling potatoes for dinner, her movements slow and deliberate. She didn't look up as Matt came in, but she heard his heavy steps and the way he leaned against the counter, staring at the floor like it held all the answers. "He won't talk to me," Matt said finally, his voice low, almost a growl. "Tyler, I don't know how to get through to him." Linda kept peeling, the knife scraping against the potato with a steady rhythm. "He's a kid," she said, her tone flat. "Kids are like that, they shut down." "It's more than that," Matt insisted, running a hand through his hair. He hates me, or ignores me. I don't know which is worse. She set the knife down and turned to him, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes were hard, the same eyes that had always made Matt feel like he was under a microscope. You brought him here, Matt. Now you deal with it. Don't expect it to be easy. I don't expect it to be easy, he snapped, louder than he meant to. But I didn't expect him to treat me like I'm some stranger. I'm his dad. Linda's gaze didn't waver. You sure about that? She asked, her voice cutting like a blade. Matt frowned, caught off guard. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, she said, turning back to the potatoes. Just that he doesn't look much like you, not in the face, not in the way he acts. The words landed like a punch to the gut. Matt opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. He turned on his heel and headed for the back door, his heart pounding in his ears. The doubts he'd always pushed down, those little whispers that crept in when he looked at Tyler and saw nothing of himself, came roaring back, louder than ever. He shook his head, muttering "bullshit" under his breath, and grabbed a pair of shears from the shed to trim the overgrown bushes in the backyard, hoping the physical work would drown out his mother's words. That afternoon, Robert took Tyler fishing at the creek. Matt watched them leave from the kitchen window, his dad with a fishing pole over his shoulder, a cooler in his hand, and Tyler trailing behind, his phone still in his grip. Matt didn't know how Robert had convinced the kid to go, but there they were, heading toward the old bridge like they were actually family. A pang of something, relief maybe, but also jealousy, twisted in Matt's chest. What's Dad doing with him? He asked Linda, who was kneading dough on the counter, her hands dusted with flour. Fishing, she said, not looking up. Said the kid needed to get out of the house. And why didn't he tell me? Matt crossed his arms, staring out the window as the two figures disappeared around the corner. I'm his dad. I should be the one taking him. Linda let out a short, humorless laugh. You're out all day chasing work or arguing with the boy. Your dad's got time and patience. I'm not arguing with him, Matt said, though he knew it wasn't entirely true. I don't know how to talk to him. Then figure it out, she said, slamming the dough onto the counter a little harder than necessary. Because that kid's not gonna open up on his own. Matt didn't reply. He watched the empty street for a moment longer, then headed for the attic, a cramped space under the roof filled with boxes and junk. He needed to do something, anything, to keep his mind off his mom's words and the growing distance between him and Tyler. He started rummaging through the boxes, pulling out faded Polaroids, moth-eaten sweaters, and a couple of toy cars he'd played with as a kid. Then he found the letter. It was tucked inside an old farmer's almanac, a yellowed envelope with Sophie's handwriting scrawled across the front. For Matt. His heart skipped a beat as he tore it open, his fingers clumsy with urgency. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the ink smudged in places but still legible. He started reading and each word hit him like a brick. Matt, I don't know how to tell you this. Tyler isn't yours. It was a mistake, a stupid night with a guy from work. I didn't want to lose you, but I can't keep lying. I'm sorry. The paper slipped from his hands, fluttering to the floor like a dead leaf. Matt stood there frozen, his mind buzzing, his chest so tight he could barely breathe. He thought, of all the fights with Sophie, the times she'd dodged his questions about Tyler, the excuses that never quite added up. It all made sense now, and yet it made no sense at all. Tyler wasn't his, not by blood at least, but he'd raised him, he'd gone to get him, he'd brought him here. What the hell did that mean? Matt spent the rest of the afternoon in the attic, sitting on a rickety stool with the letter in his lap. He read it over and over as if the words might change if he stared at them long enough. When he heard the back door open and the sound of Robert and Tyler coming in, he bolted down the stairs, the crumpled letter in his fist. In the living room, Tyler was setting a small cooler with a couple of scrawny fish on the floor, while Robert hung the fishing pole on a rack by the door. "Tyler," Matt said, his voice raw, barely holding together. The boy looked up, startled by the tone. "Did you know I'm not your dad?" The room went still, the kind of silence that presses down on you like a weight. Robert froze, his hand still on the fishing pole, his eyes darting between Matt and Tyler. Linda appeared in the doorway from the kitchen, her hands still dusted with flour, her mouth half open in shock. Tyler stood there, the cooler at his feet, staring at Matt with an unreadable expression. "What?" he said, though it didn't sound like a question. Matt held up the letter, his hand trembling. "Your mom wrote this. Says you're not mine. Says it was some other guy. Did you know?" Tyler didn't move, didn't blink, just kept staring at Matt like he was sizing him up. Then he said, quiet and cold, "Yeah." Matt felt the floor shift beneath him, like the whole house was tilting. "Yeah, what?" "Yeah, I knew," Tyler repeated, his voice steady, his eyes locked on Matt's. "Mom told me before she died. Said you were better than the other guy, that's why she never told you." The words slammed into Matt like a freight train. He stumbled back a step, his head spinning, while Robert muttered, "Damn it," under his breath, and Linda pressed a hand to her mouth. "And you didn't tell me?" Matt shouted, his voice breaking. "I've been here for days trying to do right by you, and you knew this the whole time. What did you want me to do?" Tyler snapped, his voice rising for the first time. "Tell you the second we got here? Mom said not to say anything, that you wouldn't get it." "Of course I don't get it," Matt yelled, throwing the letter to the floor. "You lied to me. Both of you lied to me. 12 years, Tyler. 12 years thinking you were my son. And what does it matter?" Tyler took a step forward, his fists clenched, his eyes blazing. "I didn't ask for this, Matt. Mom's dead, you're all I've got, and now you're coming at me like it's my fault." "It's not your fault," Matt said, his voice dropping, though he was still shaking. "But you should have told me." "Why?" Tyler's voice cracked, and for a moment he looked like he might cry, though no tears came. "So you could ditch me like everyone else? Mom said you were different. She said you wouldn't leave me." Matt went silent, his heart pounding, so hard he could hear it in his ears. Tyler was staring at him, waiting for an answer, but Matt didn't have one. He didn't know what to say, what to feel. Finally, Robert broke the silence, stepping forward with a heavy sigh. "That's enough," he said, his voice firm. "Both of you, stop. This isn't getting fixed by yelling. Stay out of this, Dad," Matt snapped, not taking his eyes off Tyler. "I'm not staying out of anything," Robert shot back. "This is my house, and that kid," he pointed at Tyler, "didn't do this to you. You and Sophie did." Matt glared at him, his chest heaving, but he didn't argue. Tyler looked down at the floor, his breathing fast and shallow, and Linda stepped forward, picking up the letter with trembling hands. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, scanning the words. "What a mess." That night, Matt didn't sleep. He stayed in the attic, sitting in the dark with the letter on the table and a can of beer in his hand, the aluminum warm from sitting out too long. Downstairs, Tyler was on the couch, or at least Matt assumed he was. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Robert and Linda had gone to bed after a short, tense argument in the kitchen, bits of which Matt had overheard. "We can't kick them out now, and this is too much." Matt's head was a mess, a storm of thoughts he couldn't quiet. Tyler wasn't his son, not by blood anyway. But he'd raised him, at least as much as he could with the distance and the fights and the years apart. He'd sent money when he had it, picked him up when Sophie died, brought him here. Did that mean nothing? Or did it mean everything? He didn't know. All he knew was that the kid downstairs wasn't the stranger the letter made him out to be. He was Tyler, Quiet, stubborn, tough, but also the same kid who'd gone fishing with Robert that afternoon. The same kid who'd asked for a hot dog at the gas station on the way here. Outside, Cedar Hollow was still, the night broken only by the chirp of crickets and the faint bark of a dog down the street. Matt took a sip of the warm beer and closed his eyes, searching for some kind of peace in the chaos tearing him apart. He didn't find it. A thin fog rolled through Cedar Hollow that morning, clinging to the cracked pavement and seeping through the gaps in the windows of the Carter house. It was barely past 6, and the town was still asleep, save for the faint crow of a rooster down the street and the creak of the old wooden floorboards under Matt's boots. He'd spent the night in the attic, sitting on a rickety stool with the crumpled letter from Sophie in his pocket, his eyes burning from lack of sleep. The can of beer he'd opened hours ago sat empty on the table, the aluminum dented where he'd gripped it too hard. His mind had been a storm all night, replaying the fight with Tyler, the words of the letter, the years of lies that had unraveled in a single moment. He didn't know what to feel, anger, betrayal, grief, or something else he couldn't name. He came down the stairs slowly, the letter still in his pocket, its weight heavier than the paper itself. In the living room, Tyler was asleep on the couch, wrapped in the old quilt, his phone on the floor where it had slipped from his hand. Matt paused, watching him for a moment. The kid's face was soft in sleep, the hard edges he carried when awake smoothed out. And for a second, Matt saw the little boy he'd known years ago, the one who'd laughed at the county fair, who'd begged for a second hot dog at the gas station. But that boy was gone, replaced by this 12-year-old who knew too much, who carried secrets Matt had never seen coming. Matt took a deep breath and headed to the kitchen where Linda was already at the stove, brewing coffee in a dented pot. "You didn't sleep," she said, not turning around. It wasn't a question. "Nope," Matt replied, slumping into a chair at the table. He rubbed his face with both hands, feeling the stubble on his jaw and the ache in his bones. "Couldn't." Linda poured a mug of coffee and slid it across the table to him, her movements sharp but not unkind. "After last night, I'm not surprised. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," Matt admitted, wrapping his hands around the mug, the heat burning his palms. He stared at the steam rising from the black liquid, his voice low. "I don't know what to do with this, Mom. I don't know what to feel." Linda turned back to the stove, her shoulders stiff. "He's a kid, Matt. Not your blood, but a kid. And you brought him here." "I know I brought him here," Matt said, his voice tight. "But they lied to me. Sophie lied to me for years, and he knew and didn't say a damn thing. How am I supposed to act like that's okay?" "You don't act like it's okay," Linda said, her tone matter-of-fact, as she cracked an egg into a skillet. "You deal with it the best you can. That's what we all do." Matt let out a frustrated grunt, slamming the mug down harder than he meant to, coffee sloshing over the rim. "Don't give me that, Mom. This isn't some life lesson. You can fix with a saying, 'This is my life.'" "And his too," Linda said, pointing toward the living room with her spatula. "That boy doesn't have anyone else. No mom, no real dad, nothing. Just you." Her words cut deep, sharper than Matt expected. He stared at the coffee pooling on the table, watching it seep into the grain of the wood. "I don't know if I can do this," he murmured, almost to himself. "I don't know if I can look at him and not think about what Sophie did." Linda sighed, a long, weary sound that carried the weight of her years. "Then let him go. Send him to foster care, or see if Sophie's got any family left somewhere. But don't keep him here if you're going to treat him like he's a mistake." "He's not a mistake," Matt said, his voice rising despite himself. "He's my son, or he was, I don't know. I don't know what the hell he is anymore." "Then figure it out," Linda snapped, turning to face him with a fire in her eyes. "Because that boy isn't going to wait forever for you to grow a spine." The day dragged on, slow and heavy, like the fog outside that refused to lift. Matt left the house after breakfast, walking aimlessly through the streets of Cedar Hollow. He passed the gas station where he'd been begging for work, but didn't go in. He passed the diner on Main Street, but didn't stop for a coffee. He just walked, hands in his pockets, the letter burning a hole in his jeans. He thought about tearing it up, throwing it in the creek, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. It was the last piece of Sophie he had, and the only proof of the truth that had shattered everything. When he got back to the house, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Robert was in the backyard, gutting a couple of fish he and Tyler had caught the day before, the knife slicing through scales with a wet, rhythmic sound. Matt leaned against the shed, watching his dad work, the letter still in his pocket like a lead weight. "You talked to him yet?" Robert asked, not looking up from the fish. "Nope," Matt said, kicking at a patch of dirt with his boot. "Don't know what to say." Robert grunted, a sound that could have been annoyance or just exhaustion. "You don't gotta say anything fancy. Just talk to him. He's a kid, not a judge." "Easy for you to say," Matt muttered, crossing his arms. "You're not the one who just found out your whole life's been a lie." Robert set the knife down on the makeshift table, a piece of plywood balanced on two sawhorses, and looked at Matt, his eyes hard but not unkind. "No, I'm not. But I'm the one who watched you grow up, Matt. And I know you're tougher than this. What Sophie did was a damn shame, no question. But that boy didn't lie to hurt you. He lied because he didn't know what else to do. And that makes it okay?" Matt asked, his voice tight with frustration. "No," Robert said, picking up the knife again. "But it makes him human. Like you, like me, like your mom. We've all lied sometime. What matters is what you do after." Matt didn't respond. He watched as his dad went back to the fish, the blade cutting through flesh with a steady precision. The smell of the creek clung to the air, mixing with the faint tang of blood, and Matt felt his stomach turn. Not from the fish, but from the weight of his dad's words. That night, after a quiet dinner of fried fish and mashed potatoes, Linda had set the table without a word, her silence louder than any lecture. Matt sat in the living room with a can of beer in his hand. The TV was off, the only sound the hum of the old ceiling fan spinning lazily above, stirring the warm air. Tyler was on the couch, as always, earbuds in and phone in his lap, his face lit by the blue glow of the screen. "Tyler," Matt said, his voice rough from the day's exhaustion. The kid didn't look up. "Tyler, take those earbuds out for a sec." Tyler sighed, loud enough to make sure Matt heard it, but he pulled the earbuds out, letting them dangle around his neck. "What now?" he asked, his tone sharp, like he was bracing for another fight. "We need to talk," Matt said, setting the beer on the coffee table. He pulled the letter from his pocket and placed it in front of him, the paper creased and worn from being handled too much. "About this." Tyler glanced at the letter, then back at Matt, his expression guarded. "I already told you everything. Last night. What else do you want?" "I want to understand," Matt said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "I want you to tell me why you didn't say anything sooner. Why you let me bring you all the way here thinking you were my son." "Because I didn't want you to leave me," Tyler said, the words spilling out fast, like he'd been holding them in too long. He looked down at his hands, his fingers twisting together. "Mom said you were the only good thing I had. That the other guy, the real one, was a mess. She said if you found out, you'd hate me." Matt felt his throat tighten, the air catching in his chest. "And you believed her?" "I don't know," Tyler mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe at first I didn't. But then, I thought she might be right. You were always gone, sending money when you could, but you were never there. And when Mom died, I figured if I told you, you'd say, 'Not my problem,' and that'd be it." "You really thought that?" Matt asked, his voice breaking. "Tyler, I came to get you the second I heard. I dropped everything to bring you here. Because you thought I was yours. Tyler shot back, his voice rising, his eyes flashing with something raw. If you'd known the truth from the start, what would you have done? Would you have come for me anyway? Matt opened his mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. He stared at Tyler, his heart pounding, the question hanging between them like a blade. I don't know, he said finally, his voice heavy with honesty. I don't know what I would have done 3 months ago, but I know you're here now. And I'm not letting you go. Tyler looked at him, his eyes glistening but no tears falling. Then why'd you yell at me last night? Why'd you throw that letter at me like I was trash? Because I was pissed, Matt admitted, running a hand through his hair. Because I felt like an idiot. 12 years, Tyler. 12 years thinking you were my blood, and then I find out you're not. That doesn't just go away overnight. I didn't ask you to make it go away, Tyler said, his voice softer now. I just didn't want you to kick me out. I'm not kicking you out, Matt said, and for the first time he sounded sure. You're my son. I don't care what that letter says. I don't care what happened with Sophie. I raised you. I brought you here. And I'm gonna keep doing it. Tyler didn't say anything for a long moment. He stared at the letter, his breathing quick and uneven, and then he spoke, his voice so quiet Matt almost missed it. Mom said the other guy's in jail. Said he killed someone in a bar fight. That's why he couldn't know about me. Matt felt a chill run down his spine. Did she tell you who he was? No, Tyler said, shaking his head. Just that. And that you were my shot at not ending up like him. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, like the smoke from Robert's cigarette that still lingered in the room. Matt picked up the letter and handed it to Tyler. Read this, he said, and then tell me what I'm supposed to do with you. Tyler took the paper with shaky hands and read it in silence. When he finished, his eyes were wet, and for the first time since he'd arrived, he looked like he might break. I don't want to be like him, he whispered, letting the letter fall to the floor. That's why I came with you. Mom said you could teach me to be different. Matt didn't know how long he sat there, staring at Tyler after those words. It could have been seconds or minutes or an hour. Finally, he got up from the chair, knelt in front of the boy, and pulled him into a tight hug, the kind he hadn't given in years. Tyler stiffened at first, but then he melted into it, and Matt felt the boy's tears soak into his shirt. Matt was crying too, a quiet, burning kind of cry that left his throat raw. You're not gonna be like him, Matt said, his voice rough and broken. I swear you're not. As long as I'm here, you're not gonna be like him. Tyler didn't say anything, just nodded against Matt's chest, his small frame shaking. When they pulled apart, they both wiped their faces with their sleeves, awkward but lighter, like they'd let go of something heavy they'd been carrying too long. You want a soda? Matt asked, standing up, his voice still thick with emotion. It was a clumsy offer, but it was all he could think of. Yeah, Tyler said, a faint smile tugging at his lips, the first real one Matt had seen since they got here. But not that cheap stuff you got last time. Matt let out a short laugh, surprised he could still laugh at all. You're a little punk, you know that? Fine, we'll go to the diner tomorrow and you can pick whatever you want. The next morning, Matt sat with his parents in the kitchen after breakfast. Tyler was out back, kicking a soccer ball against the shed, the thump-thump echoing through the open window. Linda poured coffee, and Robert lit a cigarette, the smoke curling toward the ceiling like always. I'm staying, Matt said, cutting straight to it. With Tyler. We're gonna build something here. Work, school, whatever it takes. But we're staying. Linda looked at him, her eyes softer than they'd been in days, maybe years. You did good coming back, she said, and she put a hand on his shoulder, a rare gesture that meant more than any words. Robert took a drag on his cigarette and nodded. The kid's all right, he said. Quiet, but all right. You help him, he'll turn out fine. I'm gonna help him, Matt said, and he meant it, the certainty settling into his bones like it hadn't before. The house was still old, the town still small and gray, but something had shifted. It wasn't a happy ending, not by a long shot, just a rough beginning, full of scars and fragile promises. For Matt and Tyler, that was enough.